Okay, so let's get going. This should take about 45 minutes or so. It's kind of hard to tell exactly how long it's always going to take, but that's what we're shooting for. Feel free to enter comments or questions in the chat. I may or may not be able to keep track of the chat, but I do have my assistant, Michael, who's lurking in the background, and he'll be monitoring that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here is mixed model business strategy. And this is a topic, this whole concept of business strategy is obviously an important one because in our experience, many companies, most companies that try to adapt the lean methods are really not adapting it as a business strategy or as a total business strategy. And as a result, then they're not achieving the same kind of success that companies like Toyota achieve. We always ask, well, where's the next Toyota? But it's kind of hard to find sometimes. I think the main reason is that the lean manufacturing or the Toyota production system strategy is not being adapted at the level that it needs to be, right, to be totally successful. So here's the agenda for this webinar. I'm going to talk about backstory, so introduction, some of the background information that will be helpful in terms of understanding the topic. And then we're going to define briefly some of the terms so we know what we're discussing here, what we mean by strategy, what we mean by mixed model manufacturing. And then there's an interesting kind of concept that I came across recently, 4 main reasons why people buy. Because I think at the end of the day, we can agree that a successful business has customers, right? People willing to give you money. And if no customers, then there's no business, right? And the whole idea or the need for a lean manufacturing system, if you have no customers, doesn't make sense. So we're going to package this webinar around the concept of the 4 reasons. So mixed model manufacturing, excuse me, mixed model manufacturing, and then the 4 reasons why people would want to give us money, open their wallets and give us money. Okay, so here's the backstory. My background in lean, or what we now call lean, was actually with a product or a method called DFT. And some of you maybe are too young to remember this if you're involved in the lean world. But back in the, say, starting in the mid-'80s into around the year 2000 or so, there was this period of time where lean wasn't even lean, and some of the powerhouses in this area of process improvement were not called lean companies. And so DFT, which stands for Demand Flow Technology, was one of these. So DFT was essentially a Americanized version of the Toyota production system, if you want to think of it that way. And it was also more limited, I would say, to industrial engineering kinds of approaches, as opposed to, say, respect for people and the cultural aspects and building a lean culture. There was less of that in DFT and more focused on things like line balancing, standard work, material supply chain management, et cetera. But still very similar to the TPS or Toyota production system. So when in years after working with DFT, I started studying the Toyota production system. It was obvious, that the two were very compatible. Just that the Toyota production system was much more of a total business strategy, I would say, than DFT. DFT people are going to argue with me about that, but basically the success of the Toyota production system is that it's still here, and DFT has kind of faded away, wasn't able to be sustained, over that long period of time. So total business strategy, when we say total, we mean it includes everyone in the company, includes all departments, all processes. So there's nothing left out. So sales falls under the umbrella of TPS in some way or another, and also all the support disciplines like accounting and finance and maintenance, everything falls under TPS, or should. Now, in case you were curious about DFT, if you haven't heard about this before, there's still a lot of aficionados of DFT, and you can still find DFT if you do a Google search, demand flow technology, or go into LinkedIn, for example, and look for how many people have referenced DFT in their profiles. And there's still a lot of loyal followers of DFT, believe it or not. And General Electric was one of them. So for a while there, when I was working with JCIT, which was the DFT consulting company, we were promoting this short video by Jack Welch, who was lauding the benefits of DFT. It's only about 45 seconds, and you can find it on YouTube if you do a search for Jack Welch and DFT, where he talks about DFT and specifically talks about DFT as a total business strategy. So total business strategy was one of the sales points we made when we were talking about DFT. Promoting DFT as not just in a process improvement technique or something only applicable to manufacturing, but promoting it as a total business strategy that affected everyone in the company. And you can actually see Jack Welch repeating that in this short video, which I guarantee you we replayed it thousands of times. So Lean versus Six Sigma versus mixed model management. One of the issues with General Electric is that shortly after, say a year or two after adopting DFT, they changed horses and jumped on the horse of Six Sigma. And so Six Sigma, again, is a valuable set of tools, but I don't regard Six Sigma as a total business strategy. And in fact, when you talk to Toyota folks, inside Toyota, they don't really know that much about Six Sigma. And certainly they know something about quality, and they know something about reducing process variability, but they don't, they really haven't adopted the Six Sigma package. So I'm not disparaging Six Sigma, but basically I'm, clearly lean, so to speak, to the lean manufacturing or the Toyota production system or the DFT approach to process improvement. And Six Sigma could be a part of that. Okay, so mixed model manufacturing is the term we use for a version of lean or the Toyota production system, but with a focus, again, on the basics. So if you're familiar with the house of lean, that image, there's a house and all these elements and columns. The part that we're focusing on is in mixed model manufacturing is the foundation. And the reason for that is, boy, there's a lot to know with the Toyota production system. We realized Leonardo Group couldn't be the world's experts on everything. So we had to pick something that we were competent in and were strong in. And the other thing is that when we visit companies and talk to them and assess where they're at, that foundation is not always there. And if it's not, then your whole house of lean is not going to stand. So we decided there was a niche for us or a place for us building that foundation, because in the vast majority of companies that we visit and do an assessment with, that foundation is really not there. Or it used to be there. That foundation used to be there in the past, but they've lost the recipe. And that's also very common, that companies that adopted lean in the past have kind of lost their way a little bit, right? Lost the training and that kind of culture that they built up as people retired and as new people came in. Okay, so what do we mean by strategy, total business strategy? Well, it's a simple definition. It's a plan of action or approach that's designed to achieve a major or an overall aim. So in the case of total business strategy, we're talking about a major aim, which is to survive, and to thrive by putting together products or services that people are willing to buy, right? If you can't do that, then you, over time, don't have a business. And there's no guarantee that you're going to survive. There are many great companies. I'm thinking of Kodak in particular, that were huge. Rochester, New York, they had in that one site something like 75,000 employees, and Kodak, I'm not sure if it even still exists. I guess it does, but it's a shadow of its former self. So there's no guarantee that we're going to survive and thrive. So by strategy, we mean, what is our plan for surviving and thriving long term? How can we survive and ideally grow? And what's our plan to do that? Okay, now this is a really interesting book that I came across, and I'll just mention it, related to strategy. So what is the Toyota production system strategy? And this book is mainly talking about how to merge theory of constraints, Goldratt and Lean and Six Sigma, understand all of those elements and how do we put them together. But there's a substantial chapter in this book on a meeting, an interview they did with Taiichi Ohno, who's like the father of the Toyota production system. And what Taiichi Ohno said in this interview, and I'm just giving you a short little snippet here, it's many pages of content with this interview, but what he said basically was, I'm willing to share this now that I'm retired. This was later in his career, after he'd already retired from Toyota, because Toyota and other companies are now strong enough to stand on their own on 2 feet. But when I was developing these ideas, I did my best to try to baffle and confuse Westerners like Americans and Europeans that would come and visit in Japan, because I didn't want them to be competitors. So I would confuse all these Westerners with ideas like Kanban, and used a lot of Japanese terms and the wastes. And what I was saying was not untrue, but it was confusing, and I didn't want to reveal the actual essence of the Toyota production system, because I didn't want to allow people to be more powerful competitors to Toyota. But he said, now I'm not so worried about that, so I'm willing to share. And basically, just to summarize, the vision is at Toyota and with Taiichi Ohno was to build a river system. So the river system, think of it in terms of interconnected processes that are able to flow at a constant rate, aka takt time, and that also include outside suppliers or supply chain that are able to reduce that time, right, from launch or from initiation of a plan all the way to delivery to the customer, reduce that time and eliminate obstructions to that flow. So in a river, we have obstructions like dams, and we have, fast flowing portions of the river like rapids. And the idea here was to smooth that out over time and develop a business system that was able to do that. Now, clearly, obstructions in a business system would be things like waste, right? And so elimination of waste was not a bad thing, but that wasn't the central vision of Taiichi Ohno. It was creating this river system. And you'll notice here in this short quote, he's using the term mixed model assembly process. So that was another important point. At least at the time, many factories were dedicated to specific models. And so they could be maybe more efficient in the short term or in a narrow sense, but from a company point of view, very inefficient, because you'd have to duplicate or replicate those resources for each model or each model family. So a mixed model assembly process that could build many different models in the same line was what they had to do. And so that was part of their vision as well. Now, the other thing he mentioned, I don't have a clip of that here, but the other thing that Taiichi Ohno mentioned was, hey, this wasn't easy. People did not naturally embrace this this concept of a river system. He said it took decades, not years, decades, 40 years of working on this to try to evolve this way of thinking. And he even in the interview got red in the face and got really worked up when the interviewers mentioned things like cost accounting. And he was adamant that the accountants were one of the biggest obstacles to achieving this, because their ways of calculating efficiencies were a contradiction to what he was trying to accomplish. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that because very few companies actually have had that kind of leader like Taiichi Ohno that was willing to spend 40 years and had the clout, right, had the level of authority to try to make this happen. And that, in my mind, is the reason why so many companies that are embracing lean haven't taken it to that level, right? Because they haven't had people at the top that are fanatics about building a river system. Whereas when I go to Toyota, and I've spent quite a bit of time, not as a Toyota employee, but working inside Toyota and teaching our public classes inside Toyota, I see this, that they have built a river system, not just in Japan, but I mean, Toyota Material Handling, which was our main host for a lot of public classes, they've spent a long time building a river system for their forklift, product lines, not just inside the factory, but extending out to their supply chain, et cetera. So I see this is actually how they've done it, right? But very few companies have been, able to embrace that. So what is going to obstruct the flow? Just a quick review. What's going to keep us from having a smooth flowing river? Well, the 7 ways. So perfectly valid concept. Certainly quality problems. Another interesting thing in this interview, they asked him, well, wasn't Toyota's strategy really to focus on quality? And he kind of laughed and he said, well, yeah, in a sense, but if you have quality issues, they obstruct the river, right? So that was the main reason. Also, if you have quality problems, then customers are not going to want to buy your product. So there's some practical reasons why quality was an issue, but Taiichi Ohno didn't seem to view this as the #1 goal, right? It was, just similar to the 7 wastes. It was one of the contributing factors that would inhibit or obstruct the smooth flow of this river system. Okay, what obstructs the river? Lack of pull. So if you don't have a pull system, not just within the factory, or within the company, but extending out to your supply chain, then you're going to have accumulation. You're going to have a lack of smooth flow, right? You're going to have too much inventory in certain places and too little in others. So a complete integrated pull system all the way back in the supply chain is one of the critical elements. Training, in other words, everyone needs to be on board with this, and training was one of the keys for success as well. And that continues in the Toyota organization today. And then weak product design. So the issue here is something that's sometimes called design for manufacturability, or sometimes called the simultaneous engineering. So that, obviously what the customer buys is your product. So product design is critical, but also product design for manufacturability needs to be part of the thinking. Otherwise, no matter how much effort you put into designing the river system, you're going to have challenges. Okay, so what makes the river system a total business strategy? Again, we're still in the introduction phase here. We'll get into the meat of the webinar here in a second. Well, a total business strategy has to impact all areas of the company, say, including all your support organizations, not just operations, right? And in most companies adopting lean, it is operations, right? And very little impact on sales, very little impact on support organizations like finance and accounting, et cetera. So that's clearly an important point. You can't say it's total if it doesn't include everyone. And the other thing, which you've already touched on, is it extends beyond the factory. We can't say it's total if your supply chains are not in some way connected. So these supply chain companies are not your company, but Toyota actually spends a lot of time supporting their suppliers, not telling them what they have to do exactly, but sharing with them the methods and techniques and getting them to get on the same page in terms of mixed model manufacturing, in terms of adopting some of the best practices of the Toyota production system. So that's key to success. Also, we want to have a strategy that has a measurable impact on sales. So if we're making changes and there's no impact on sales, no benefit for sales, then why are we doing this again? That's something that needs to be incorporated into our thinking. Now, total business strategy has to be led from the top of the company. It's not a grassroots improvement effort. And so again, this can be a weakness. And one of the questions that I sometimes ask is, can your C-suite leaders or your managers, your top leaders in a company, actually teach lean? we had an interesting case history of a company that maybe I won't mention the name, but they had adopted Lean big time, and they'd done something like 600 Kaizen events within the first couple of years. But the CEO was looking at the results, and he said, I couldn't see actually how this was having any impact on sales or any impact on profitability, even after investing millions. Right, this was a pretty big company, and hundreds of so-called improvement events. And he said, what made the difference is I realized that my top managers, my C-suite people, and my other top leaders were kind of talking the talk. They could kind of BS about Lean. But if you actually asked them to explain or teach this to someone else, they couldn't do it. And so I made that a change. I didn't ask my C-suite leaders to become trainers, but they had to be able to teach the subject convincingly, because I realized if you can't teach something, you can't teach something to someone else, you don't really understand it. If you can't teach it to someone else, you don't understand it. If they didn't understand it, then how can they lead? So that was an interesting case. And he said, when I started doing that, then I started seeing changes, right, to the bottom line, changes to my actual business results. So one of the questions is everyone trained, right, for a total business system? Is everyone trained on some level or another? The kind of training that people need is going to vary, right, depending on your job. And the other thing that's really critical, because again, I've been doing this long enough, I took my first DFT class in 1989, right? So I've seen, several generations at this point of Lean. And what I've seen in many cases is you start out with a lot of enthusiasm and success, actually, and then it kind of runs out of steam. So one of the important points that I think Toyota is really good at is a succession plan. In other words, how are we going to train the generation of coming, right? The new employees, new hires, to replace the people that retire or move to other jobs? How do we do that effectively? Because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to lose the recipe, right? And that happens all too often. So one of the questions you would want to ask yourself for a total business strategy is, do I have a strategy in place so that people that are new are actually getting trained? The other point I wanted to make, and we're getting close, I hope I'm not boring you, but the other point I wanted to make was, am I being hyperbolic when I say dominate your market? I use that term in the title of this webinar. So dominate your market. Is that being hyperbolic? Well, maybe, but if you look at the actual results, I did a little Google research this week, and Toyota, well, that's like the gold standard, right? The Toyota production system, but they're number one in unit sales in the US for the first time, by the way, in 2021, above General Motors. They're number one as most reliable. That's a Lexus brand. Not surprising, right? In fact, the best car I ever owned, and it hurts me to say that I didn't have to. I sold it, but was a Lexus ES300. That was a great car. Number one wealthiest car maker, Toyota. Number one market share, that's Toyota Material Handling, the fork trucks, for 20 years straight. And then number two in brand value. So what is the value of this brand behind Tesla? So Tesla is kind of a sexy brand right now, and at least market capitalization is high, maybe more than they deserve. I'm not sure, but number two is Toyota. Now, getting out of the Toyota brand, there are other companies, and John Deere is an interesting one. John Deere is what I would call a DFT company, because John Deere was one of the first adopters of DFT back in the 80s, and they haven't let it go. And I know that because we're still engaged with John Deere, and we still talk to them. And in fact, a few years ago, we helped John Deere develop all of their assembly line training, online training courses, and live training courses, and their supply chain material management courses. So we're still actively engaged with them. They haven't given up on DFT. And so they, their results, I think, reflect that. They're number one in sales of farm equipment worldwide, and number one in tractor sales in the US. So, they're continuing to move forward. I think that they are gaining market share. John Deere continues to gain market share in every one of their worldwide markets as well. Now, not in unit sales, because I think in places like India, the units that are typically purchased are small units, because the typical farm in India is 5 acres, or 10 acres, not 1,000 acres. But still, they continue to grow and they continue to be strong. So I don't think dominate is too hyperbolic. Okay, so let's get into the heart of this webinar. The four major reasons why customers buy. Why would someone open their wallet and give you money, right, for your product? Well, we have external facing reasons or motivations why customers would do this, and then we have internal facing, which I want to talk about. How does mixed model manufacturing help you support that reason that someone's going to give you money? Right. So we need to look at both sides of that equation. And the four reasons are this: to stay out of trouble. I think the original phrase was stay out of jail. So if you can help someone stay out of jail, they're probably willing to give you money. Right. Now, that sounds pretty dramatic. I'm not talking about crime necessarily here, but I'm talking about requirements, right? So you have a requirement to pay your taxes. That's an obvious one. And you might need some help from people to do that. So you want to stay out of trouble by paying your taxes. You might have OSHA requirements, right? Stay out of trouble with fines or audits, etc. So that's kind of what we mean by trouble. That's why I took out the word jail. The other reason, next reason, reason two, is to have a better life. So I'm buying your product or service not because I'm going to make more money or I'm going to save money or I'm going to stay out of jail, but it's just something I want, right? I'm going to have an improved existence. And probably most of what we spend money on falls in this category, right? It could be something that's just a necessity, like food, right? I'm going to have a better life if I can eat, right? So that might be a simple example, or it could be something that's totally discretionary, but I want it, whatever it is. I want a new guitar. I want a new car. Those kind of things. So to have a better life, I think most things fall in that category. And then more in the business to business, more in the realm of business to business, B2B, 3 and 4, to either make more money. So I'm going to increase sales, or to save more money. I may not be increasing sales, but I'm not going to be spending as much on the expense side of the equation, right? You have your profit and loss statement. So the profit and loss statement has income and expenses. So number 3 is income and number 4 is expenses. So let's go through the mixed model manufacturing strategy or total business strategy in the light of these 4 motivations. So reason number 1, stay out of trouble. So what are we talking about? Well, customers stay out of trouble by buying services. So this is a common one. Like, how about lawyers? You're willing to pay a lawyer not because you love the lawyer so much or you love spending money on lawyers, but you're trying to stay out of trouble, right? And certified public accountants. So you have a CPA not because you love the CPA so much and you're going to have so much a better life, but you have to meet certain requirements like paying your taxes or meeting other requirements. Also healthcare. You don't love going to your doctor or your dentist, but you're trying to stay out of health trouble by paying for those kind of things. And then there may be some maintenance things that fall in this category as well. Also with products, there's some products that again are not pleasure related that you just have to have them, either because they're required, OSHA requires them, or they're related to safety, and so you need to have them. Maybe medical equipment falls in here as well. You need to have it, right, to provide that service. Now, on the third bullet, responsive supply chain and speed to market. So that could be another way of staying out of trouble, especially, this has come to light with the COVID pandemic, because the supply chains have kind of broken in many cases. Many of you probably have experienced this, right? Difficulty in getting what you need, right? Getting the materials you need. So it's probably affected everyone. So a responsive supply chain and speed to market might be a way of staying out of trouble, as well as some of those other factors. Now, how would mixed model manufacturing help us with this? Well, for one thing, we're going to be in trouble if our products and services don't deliver, right? If our customers buying what we're selling, either a product or service, to stay out of trouble, and our products and services don't do that because of errors in the delivering the service or errors in the product, defects in the product, that's a big problem. In fact, it may be as serious as, legal risks if our products don't deliver. So this can be critical. The other strategy that we want to look at is, in terms of supply chain and speed to market, is shortening that critical path time. We sometimes call that manufacturing cycle time, MCT, or CPT. And that was Taiichi Ohno's vision as well, shortening that time. And if we can do that, then we can stay out of trouble or reduce that trouble. And I think we've seen this actually with Toyota, because during the pandemic, Toyota came in with a lowered forecast. And the reason they lowered their forecast for vehicles was they anticipated they were going to have trouble with delivery because of shortage of parts. But what they discovered later on in the pandemic, like in 2021 last year, is they were actually doing better than they thought. And they upped their forecast. In fact, they exceeded that forecast. And I think one of the reasons for this, they didn't say this, but one of the reasons for that they were able to recover is they had a shorter supply chain, certainly in Japan. They had a shorter supply chain in terms of time delivery, and they were able to recover from this COVID impact more easily than, say, some of their competitors. Okay, so in terms of error proofing, I wanted to walk through a couple steps that we teach as part of mixed model manufacturing that can help with error proofing. Again, you may already be familiar with this, or some of this may be somewhat new, but the first one's obvious, and it's part of the house of lean. So standard work definitions, documenting standard work. So the idea here is this: you would document the work steps for every product/process. Every product and every process needs to have a standard work definition. So we document what are the steps at a pretty detailed level. What are the work steps? We separate machine and labor because they can be different. And then we record the times, so reasonable and generous times for each work step. Now, here's the important point related to quality. And this isn't always done. This is sometimes not done. What we want to do is flag the steps in our standard work definition that can be done more than one way, but only one way is the right way. So you might have a part that can go in backwards. It can go in backwards, but it's not the right way. So we want to flag those work steps that are at risk for quality. Now, clearly, if you have a work step that can only be done one way and it's the right way, you don't have much of a quality risk, right? Because you can only do it right. But many work steps are not that way. You can do it wrong. So you want to flag those. And then as you're going through this documentation for the flagged work steps, you want to see what you can do to error-proof those steps, poka-yoke. So how do you error-proof? Well, there's all kinds of techniques and methods. There are all kinds of books on poka-yoke. Maybe a fixture would help. Maybe redesigning the product. That's not so easy, but redesign the product so it can only be put together one way, right? The correct way. Redesign is typically a longer-term strategy. Go, no-go gauges, other kinds of digital tools. What we're trying to do is maybe not eliminate, but substantially reduce the risk of a defect with those steps. Now, if you can't error-proof the step for whatever reason, then you go to the next method, which is error step proofing number 2. And number 2 is a technique called check, do, check. This is something we teach, again, in the mixed model manufacturing methodology. So you're doing a number of checks or inspection. If you don't like the word check, inspect, do, inspect. So the first inspection is work that you didn't do as an operator on the assembly line. You didn't do it. It's coming to you from an upstream station or upstream process. And if there are any quality risks in that part that you're receiving, before you do your work, you want to double check and make sure that that step or that item, that element was done correctly. Remember, this isn't work you did yourself. Someone else did it, but you're providing the second set of eyes or the double check. And next thing you want to do, if you pass that hurdle, is you do your standard work, right, as defined by the standard work definition. And then third, the second check that you would do at your station is you would check your own work. So is it checking your own work as good as having someone else check it? Well, not really, right? Because you did it, and so there's an inherent bias. You may not catch your own mistakes, but you could, right? So you're going to double check your own work before you pass it on, before it is allowed to move downstream. An important reminder too, these checks should be pretty quick, but if you are taking some time, especially if you're in a very short takt time environment, right? Things are moving pretty quickly. You need to make sure you include those times in your standard work definition. You can't just leave them out because it does take some time to do them. Hopefully not very much time, right? Well worth it. Now, comment, this is sort of a subset of a check-to-check, is this idea of touch for quality. What we find is that if you just ask someone to check by looking, that is not going to be as effective as if you ask them to touch or point to, at least. If not physically touch the product, at least point to the object. With maybe just with a finger, that would be easy, or with some kind of tool like even a chopstick, which we've done in the past. And you touch that inspection point. Alternative, you could even be as sophisticated as some kind of barcode reader or some kind of camera or something that touches it. But let's try to keep it simple as much as possible. Now, if this is not going to affect the form, fit, or function of the part, you may even also want to have a mark on that product for those inspection points. Because even if you are using some kind of tool and just touching, once it moves out of that station, you don't know if that inspection was done or not. Whereas if they mark it, then chances are higher. Nothing's guaranteed, but it's higher that they actually did that check. Now, a couple case histories for you. Trinity Industries did a technique using chalk. Now, Trinity was making rail cars. These are huge, and a lot of the work, most of the work, was welding. So part of their check was check your welding seam, and they would mark it with a certain color of chalk if you did the welding. So you check your own welding, and then as it went to the rail car was rolled to the next station, there would be a double check with a different color of chalk. So when the rail car reached the end of the line, it was covered with chalk marks. But at least you had a more of a sense, no guarantee again, that it was actually checked. And then, of course, it got cleaned off and painted. So the chalk was not an issue. Also in the aerospace industry, which is my background, before I joined JCIT and started doing DFT stuff, I worked as a material manager for an aerospace company. And in certain cases, aerospace would use actually a paint dot. If it didn't affect the form, fit, or function of the unit, you would actually mark your inspections with a little mark, like a marker or sometimes a little paint pen, and the little dot would verify that inspection was done. For example, with torquing, right? How do you know that a nut was torqued properly? Well, you wouldn't, right? Just by looking at it or by re-torquing it. But if there's a little inspection dot on there, that's an indication that it was torqued properly. So again, touch for quality could be a powerful add-on. Final comment here on error proofing is that when you find something, now we're trying to stay out of trouble here. So when you find something that was done at a previous station, ideally you would return it right to that station. You don't just fix it for them, because otherwise it could happen again or keep happening. So it will be returned to the previous station. And if we're using a metric, and I'll talk about that, that's a pretty powerful technique as well, measuring the number of defects found, there's no penalty in this case if you find an error and you return it, because that's part of the team-based metric. That's part of the plan, right? We built in those checks and we found a defect. Same thing as if you make a mistake and then you find your own mistake. You correct it, but there's no penalty from a team-based metric. But if there's a defect and it somehow gets through and doesn't get caught either by the person that did the work or the next station down, and it's defined as a check that should have been done, but it got through, they didn't catch it, then that is a penalty. Now, what does the penalty mean? It just means that if you have a team-based, again, team is important. It's not focusing on an individual, but if you have a team-based bonus for that team, say paid out monthly, quarterly, then that penalty gets applied to that bonus, and that bonus gets reduced by some amount. So there's an incentive for people to pay attention, right? Because it's not only affecting their pocketbooks, but it's affecting the pocketbook of the entire team. So if you let defects get past your station too often, you may get some feedback from your team in a positive sense, I'm sure. Last one is pulling the cord, or and-on, right, the signal. If there's a problem that cannot be fixed easily within the work cycle, then there would be a signal that would trigger first level response from, say, an assistant team leader or a team leader, and then it would get escalated up depending on the nature of the problem. And that's really a critical part of the Toyota production system. And it's not just finding and fixing errors, it's really putting in place a whole cycle of verification that that problem, whatever caused that problem, the root cause has been fixed. So typically that would trigger a 90-day periodic review cycle for that issue. So this is, we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's a major issue. Now, clearly, if you have unstable processes, you could have these things going on all the time, right? Continually shutting down the line. So that's an important issue. If you're asking people to do a lot in terms of tracking defects and you have unstable processes, that's something you kind of need to fix before, right? Okay, I've got 9:44 Mountain Time, so let's move along here, maybe speed it up a little bit. Reason 2 is to have a better life. And typically I've divided having a better life as a motivation for people to give you money into 2 categories. One is things that you need to live, not optional. And probably most of our money is spent here, right? Spent on housing, on food, on clothing, things that are really not optional. But they don't make you more money, and they don't save you any money necessarily, but they're things that you need. And then there's discretionary spending, money that you have left over for things like increased comfort or increased prestige. That's like keeping up with the Joneses kind of motivation. Or people are big these days on providing life experiences. So you don't make money, you don't save money, but it's just, it's on your bucket list. That's a good way of putting it. So it's an experience you want to have. That could be as simple as a life experience going on vacation, or it could be like an exotic adventure, or it could be going to a spa of some kind, or it could be doing a 10-day fast, at a health spa. I don't know, you name it. But it's probably not going to make you money or save you money, but it's something you want to experience, right, as part of your life. And then people include educational experiences in there as well, probably similar to life experiences, but maybe a little bit different. Now, in terms of mixed model manufacturing, boy, this is too big a topic to really drill down, but I wanted to spend a couple comments on the impact of having a better life on employees. In other words, the respect for people part of the Toyota production system. How might this idea of having a better life impact our employees? And one of the powerful techniques that was used at JCIT, my DFT company that I worked for originally, is we had a skill-based compensation plan. And I haven't seen this implemented too many other places, but the idea, the way it worked at JCIT was that they treated compensation a little bit like an investment asset allocation. Those of you that have savings, right, have investments, you know that some of you are risk takers and some of you are more conservative. Right, so if you're nearing retirement age, you might want to be more conservative because the stock market can go up and down. So you might want to take your investments and put them into more stable, less risky places like bonds or real estate, those kind of things. So compensation could be thought of the same way. Most people have a very conservative compensation package, which is they get the same amount every year, every 2 weeks, let's say, in their paycheck, their salary. And then that gets adjusted for performance reviews or for inflation periodically, let's say yearly, and that's about it, right? On the other extreme with compensation, you might have people that, hey, I don't want a salary, I want to be a 100% commission because I'm a hotshot salesman and I don't want to have to depend on a salary. I want to just rely on selling and making a lot of money, right, through commissions. That'd be the other extreme. And then, you could have compensation packages that are somewhere in between. So the skill-based compensation is somewhere in between. That is to say, our compensation at JCIT was, most of it was base pay, right? It was not at risk, but a pretty sizable percentage, I'm saying in the range of maybe 40%, was based on your skills, right? Skills that you develop. So we had a certification process with a whole list of skills. And as you earn the skills, you would go up the ranks in terms of number of points earned. And when you cross certain pay bands, you would get a raise immediately, not waiting for your annual review. You would immediately get a bump in pay. And the reason this was so powerful is that we were a consulting company. And so skills were critical, right? That's what we were selling, were consulting skills. And so ability to teach classes and deliver services were the name of the game. So that worked out super well, right? And some people, like myself, were able to, advance and give yourself a pay raise by your own efforts, right? And it wasn't easy, right? You had to really train, but rise in the ranks and give yourself a raise. So I think there's room for this in a manufacturing company by having maybe not 40%, but some portion tied to getting skills. And if you're a line worker, those skills are operations, right? Getting certified in operations. And if you're a supervisor or manager, those skills are supervisory or management skills. But have some portion of your pay dependent on your own efforts to improve your skills. I think that's really pretty important. The other one is some general thoughts on this idea of respect for people, because that's confusing, I think. When people hear about the Toyota production system, they understand single piece flow and total elimination of waste. And zero defects, all those things are pretty easy to understand. But respect for people, what does that mean? What does respect mean? So we need to clarify, respect is not grandmother compassion. That's actually a Tibetan expression. Buddhism puts an emphasis on compassion, but they make it clear that it's not your grandmother's compassion, because your grandmother may be very loving, to their grandchildren, but maybe not all that bright or not necessarily doing things that are in the best interest of her grandchildren. Just too soft on them, if you want to put it that way. So this is not grandmother compassion. Is not necessarily grandmotherly. And my experience at Toyota is they have the philosophy that if you don't give someone a full job with a certain amount of demand on them, that's being disrespectful to the person. Right? You're not respecting their capabilities as a human being, or not challenging someone enough to grow, right, and to gain skills, for example, is a sign of disrespect. So that's a different kind of compassion, right? So it's not mean, but it's actually challenging people to grow. And you can see this too in their succession plan at Toyota, because typically a manager or a supervisor or a team leader is doing the job of the next level above them, which is challenging, right? But they are doing the job of the next level above them without getting the pay and without getting the title, so that when they finally do get the pay and the title for the next level above them, they've already been doing that job. And so that transition, that management transition, doesn't really involve much time of people learning their new jobs. They already know it. And so that's pretty powerful strategy. So if you're a assistant team leader, you want to be a team leader, but when you finally get that job title and presumably that pay raise, you've already been doing that. You've been doing that job for a while. So this is not the Amazon approach. And a word of caution here is that the more you pursue this path of developing skills and you have a strong succession plan, it's going to be really hard in your company to hire people from the outside, because someone coming from the outside at other than entry level, they haven't gone through that process, right? So they're not going to be able to just plug in to a management position and start running. So companies like Toyota very rarely hire into more senior levels from outside the company. So that's one challenge. The other one is, interestingly enough, it's going to be hard to change the number of shifts. It's not going to be really hard, especially going up, to go from one shift to two shifts. I was wondering why Toyota Material Handling in Columbus, Indiana, kept adding buildings or kept extending the buildings and kept one shift. And I think the reason is, and they confirmed this in talking to them, is to go from one to two shifts would be essentially trying to recreate a whole culture that has developed over 25 years. So they figure it's better to extend the physical footprint of the factory when they needed to expand capacity rather than simply add a shift. So there is a negative, right? They're not taking advantage of this factory for most of the 24 hours of the day, but they're still able to keep that culture going. So this is not the Amazon approach. The Amazon approach is dumb down the job, not just Amazon, a lot of companies like Maquiladoras in Mexico as well. Dumb down the job so you can train people very easily, make it very repetitive. The problem with that is people hate it, right? And in fact, Amazon knows this as well. So they actually have a policy so that warehouse workers, they don't expect them to stay. Now, one of the problems that Amazon has is they're running out of people, right? In the population in America, they're running out of people to fill those jobs. But they plan on people quitting or moving to some other job and not even staying in those jobs. So this is very different from the Toyota approach. Okay, quickly here, we're at 9:54. So I don't know if we'll get all this done, but I'll do my best. So reason number 3 that customers would give you money is to save more money. And by the way, I've noticed since we're kind of involved in this industry that the people that have online courses, right, online training, the ones that do best are online training to make more money. Training people how to make more money, they seem to be doing the best. Okay, so how do you save money from the customer perspective? How do I save more money? Well, I can pay less, right? Simply pay less for what I'm buying. It's like pay less for materials. I'm going to save money that way. Or I can not pay less, but I can gain some efficiency, right, in terms of my own company. Or I can extend the product or equipment lifespan. That's actually a big one for Toyota Material Handling. Or reduce operating costs. In fact, Toyota Material Handling, that's the TMH you see there. One of their big sale points, and this is very smart on their part, is not to focus on competing on price. Because I don't know what all the prices are, but I imagine a Toyota fork truck is not the cheapest one you could get. But they focus on rather the total cost of ownership. And they make the case with data, right? They make the case that over the life of your fork truck, this Toyota acquisition, the Toyota fork truck is actually going to be the cheapest one because it has the lowest total cost of ownership. The lowest cost of ownership. And that's convincing, right, to a lot of people because they're number one in their market. So fuel consumption, maintenance, all of those issues, when you add it all up, because remember, with a fork truck as well, most of the cost is the person, right, the driver of the fork truck. So they've been very successful with that total cost of ownership approach. So mixed model manufacturing related to saving money, this is really the domain inside your company. This is really the domain of lean or lean classic. So companies that are not embracing lean as a total business strategy, they're embracing it as a cost reduction strategy, right? How to eliminate waste, how to be more productive, how to be more efficient. That's how most companies, I would say, are using lean, right? How to cut costs. When you do a Kaizen event, you're reporting all the cost savings. And we need to emphasize that too, the idea of Kaizen is not rework. I'll talk about that in more detail. Now, the biggest in terms of cost, the biggest overlooked opportunity, I would say, certainly in terms of productivity, is this idea of flexing. So I don't think that flexing is actually a Toyota practice. So if you visit a Toyota factory, I don't think you're going to see much in the way of flexing the way we teach it. But I'll spend more time on that in a second. The other big lean waste that costs a lot of money, right, that they can save money, or you can save money, is this idea of frequent line rebalancing. It's this concept which I think is wrong, that takt time should be related to demand that's current, and that when demand changes, you recalculate takt time and you rebalance the line. That's a recipe for constant line rebalancing, depending on volatility, right, of demand. But even a company like Toyota Material Handling, they rebalance their line once, twice, 3 times a year as demand, changes, to adjust the production of their line to current demand. But you don't have to do that. So let's explain briefly what we mean by that. And this is a big part of mixed model manufacturing. First one is flexing. So what we mean by that is moving, right? Moving in the line. Now, you could have people coming in, like floaters coming in and doing a certain amount of quote unquote flexing. But what we're talking about here is workers on the line moving to an open workstation, or in some cases, moving to a station that's already occupied in an assembly line and helping, right? What we call aiding and assisting. And it's not just random. It's not looking around for something to do, but it's moving based on some signals, right? So we have a whole signaling methodology. But what this will allow you to do, this is incredibly powerful. So take notes here. You can design an assembly line with a flexibility range of 50 to 100% of its design capacity without rebalancing the line. In other words, you can adjust the output of this line from 50 to 100% of its design capacity just by adding and taking away people. You don't have to change the material delivery plan. You don't have to change the workstation rebalancing. You don't have to change the standard work definitions. Nothing changes other than the number of people. But the people have to be able to shift, right, and move and work at more than one station. The other advantage of this is the third bullet here, is that if people can do that, then any time that was spent waiting, and believe me, I've seen plenty of production lines where people spend a substantial amount of their time waiting, right? Because they have nothing to work on, or they're blocked, but they have a unit in front of them, they can't move it out. So you can get 30% or more productivity gain by having people move, right? Move to an open station and work. Now, the biggest psychological barrier to flexing is this idea that some people, maybe Toyota's included, cannot grok. And that is that this requires you to have some open stations where there's no worker. And that's like unthinkable for some companies. So you'd have a station with no worker, and the time where that station would be occupied is when someone flexes into it. And maybe they work there for a while and then they move out. So essentially you'd be over designing a line and allowing those holes in the line or those spaces, and people would flex in and out of them. But this is incredibly powerful. By the way, here's a book. I've interviewed this guy. We've had a lot of conversations with him, Gordon Garan, and he has a book on a particular style of self-balancing, what he calls self-balancing, and we call flexing. And he said he's never seen less than a 30% productivity gain, which is huge. It's absolutely huge. It's now 10 o'clock. We're getting close to the end. If you can stick around, guys. I'm getting close to the end here. And then the other issue, basically related to cost, is line rebalancing. And it's related to this idea of flexing. So if you can design a line where you don't have to redesign to change the output of the line, you can just add or take away people, then you don't have to rebalance it. Eventually, sure, you're going to have to do this, but not 2 or 3 times a year necessarily. And remember, every time you do this line rebalancing, you've got weeks or months of impact, right, with your engineering staff to do it. It's not a minor detail. I mean, there are a lot of areas that are impacted when you rebalance. So you want to reduce or eliminate the need to do this as much as possible. And flexing is the way to do it. Okay, last reason, to make more money. So this is the revenue side of your profit and loss statement. And obviously you can make more money by selling more. Of your products or services, you want to maintain your pricing. So you don't want to get into a price war. And so mixed model manufacturing can be a powerful aid in terms of maintaining your pricing level and not getting into price negotiations, because you can offset the price with other advantages. And even if your market is not growing, you can still grow by gaining market share. and Toyota Material Handling, the fork truck factory, has been gaining market share every year as well. So it's not just the growing customers, but it's actually taking business away from their competitors. So how does Toyota grow? How does Toyota Material Handling and Toyota Automotive grow? I'm not sure, but my analysis based on my own psychology, which maybe is conservative, but a few years ago, I bought a Toyota Camry. Now, did I buy the Toyota Camry because it was the sexiest car out there? No, not necessarily. Why did I buy it? What was my motivation? Well, it was mainly that I didn't want to have to mess with it. I wanted to get a car that I wasn't going to have to maintain that much, right? Do the usual things, change the oil, change the tires. I didn't want to have to do that much more. And my impression was that Toyota was going to be the right choice for that. And I think a lot of people share with that, because Toyota is not known as being the flashiest car, and it's not even technically the most advanced necessarily. I mean, they've done some good things. They're not leading the way in electric cars, for example. But people buy Toyotas because they're good enough, right? They're stylish enough, and they're dependable, right? They don't want to be dealing with quality issues. So I think that's something that motivated me and probably many other people. Toyota, by the way, as I already indicated, is the #1 car maker in the United States right now, exceeding General Motors. So I think that's a big deal, because it's clearly not the sexiest car. All right. The other thing is Toyota is extremely profitable, making more money. They're extremely profitable, the money that's left over. And the explanation for that, in my opinion, is the river system. So this is Taiichi Ohno. No one else, none of their competitors has a river system or a totally integrated pull system the way that Toyota does. And at the end of the day, they get to keep a lot of the money that other people don't get to keep, because they've eliminated a lot of this waste, and they've eliminated a lot of this time over many years, not instantaneously. And so they've achieved a high level of efficiency, let's say, within their factories that allows them to keep the money. Okay, so mixed model strategy, mixed model manufacturing goals, high-level goals. We want to eliminate changeover time between models. We're going to design mixed model lines, but we don't want to have changeover times if we can design it out between models on an assembly line. So you can do A, B, X, M models all seamlessly on the same production line. That's one of the goals. We want to have a flexible line. Again, this was Taiichi Ohno's goal as well, but didn't take it to the level we're discussing here, to be able to adjust to customer design. We do that by slightly over-designing the line compared to current demand, especially if we're growing, and then we introduce flexing. And if you do that, your productivity guaranteed is going to be higher than a traditional assembly line where everyone is kind of stays at their station. And then milk runs or outside materials are clearly integrated. Again, Toyota spends a lot of time on this, as much as possible with daily milk runs to external suppliers based on a pull signal, and shorten that supply chain as much as possible. Now, there are challenges if your suppliers are overseas. You need to think about this. And Toyota actually brings in a lot of material from Japan, right? Toyota Material Handling does. And so this is a challenge. They did have challenges during the COVID, right? Or continue to have them. But the shorter your supply chain and as local as possible, the better off you're going to be, right? So this is all part of the mixed model strategy that we teach. The other important point, Kaizen should not be reworked. So lean is not equal to Kaizen. Actually, if you design your processes correctly, Kaizen should be a relatively minor part of your lean initiative, not something to be proud of necessarily. So if you really have a need or lots of Kaizen opportunities, that's a red flag. That's not something to brag about. So at Toyota and other lean companies, I don't want to keep hammering on Toyota. A lot of other companies are doing an excellent job, but they're lean to begin with. They're lean by design, not lean by fixing it later through Kaizen efforts, right? And this is also a reason that Taiichi Ohno said, be careful with implementing Kanban or pull systems, because if you don't have stable processes, your Kanban system is going to fail because you're going to have too much variability. Okay, so we're at the end. Thanks for sticking with me if you did. If you didn't, I wouldn't know it. We've been taking our 25 years of content, right? Teaching courses, working with clients, developing tools, doing webinars like this. And during the COVID, we took advantage of this kind of a slowdown for us to put together a website, a membership site called the Lean Design Studio. And we still have a mountain of content we haven't put on there yet because we're reviewing, updating, making sure everything meets our current quality standards for all of that educational material. But there's a lot there already, including all of the courses very similar to what we developed for John Deere, right, on mixed model line design and mixed model material management, all kinds of stuff. And the other thing that's really important are roadmaps. So our roadmaps are like checklists for implementation. These are things that we use in our consulting work, but we're making them available as part of the Lean Design Studio. I don't know if this is stupid or not, but we're doing it. So there's this Lean Design Studio out there, which you can take advantage of to get trained. And we've also included simulation modeling software as part of the studio, which we think is really important, to not implement process changes without testing them first in a modeling environment. And then the roadmaps, all the roadmaps are in there. We have a Kaizen roadmap. We're working on that currently, so that's not there, but the line design roadmap is there. The material management roadmap is there. So all kinds of great stuff. If you go to this leandesignstudio.com, you come to an information page and you can